you.
I understand that you and your team are here for your annual retreat, is that right?
Once or twice a year, we have trips to interesting places where we have an international staff of architects working for us who've never seen anything but New York, very often, and including American-born architects who haven't seen much of the country. So we're here at Charleston because we're doing so much work here. It's very relevant. But we've been recently to Philadelphia. We've been to Wilmington, Delaware, where winter tour is. We've been to Boston and Chicago. Those come to my mind immediately. And there are intense saturations in a place, because place directed architecture, as Gary said, is very much central to our strategy of design.
Well, it's an incredible honor to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to maybe start with a few questions about Charleston's favorite topic, which is itself. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your history visiting this place, your history with Charleston.
Well, I think it's great that the cities that have an obsession with themselves are the cities that you really want to visit and be in. New York is obsessed with itself. Chicago, Philadelphia used to hate itself, now it loves itself, which is a good thing. Boston didn't realize it wasn't the capital of the world until only recently. I first came to Charleston, I was doing some teaching, I think at maybe North Carolina State or someplace like that. And with a couple of professional colleagues, we decided we would come to Charleston. And we came. And the Mills Hotel was relatively new as a renovated facility. We stayed there. We had a wonderful Saturday and Friday and Saturday. And we liked it so much we thought we'd stay there Sunday. And we did. But nobody told us it was dry on Charleston on Sunday. That was a low blow. But Charleston has changed, and I needn't tell most people in this room, dramatically, but King Street was kind of run down. And there weren't many tourists. I mean, we were, I think, a time of year comparable to this. I don't remember exactly, but it was pleasantly mild to walk around. Anyhow, walking through the neighborhoods, and there was almost no guidebooks to look at. We had to self-direct tour, discover things. It's totally different today and much, much better. So I think Charleston is one of the great success stories. Can Charleston become too successful like New York? The big problem is, can it price itself out of the market, so to speak? That's a struggle. It's a struggle that no one would have ever imagined in 1978 or 79 when I first came.
So you're talking about some incredible changes that have happened in our city, and we haven't fixed everything, but I promise we can give you a cocktail on Sunday.
I've made sure of that, or I will come back a second time.
And I'm curious to know how Charleston's urbanism and architecture have influenced your career, and as well as the practice of RAMSA.
Well, when I came here the first time, I was about 40 years old, I guess, and I had done some work and achieved a certain status, but I had dreams of a kind of revival of urbanism at the suburban scale. I realize Charleston isn't a suburb, but at a scale of houses on streets, close together, little front yards, so forth. But there were very few examples. There were very urban places like Back Bay in Boston, for example, or Greenwich Village in New York. But coming to Charleston and walking through the streets with the wonderful landscape and the houses with their porches and so forth, gave me a whole new insight into what might be possible. And we've carried that in the office forward. And when we were given the opportunity to co-design Celebration with my friend Jack Robertson, we took all the developers. Disney wanted to be sponsor of Celebration, but wasn't going to build all the houses. So they said, and they talked to various developers, home builders they're called, and they all said they wouldn't touch this project with a 10-foot pole. And Disney said, here's a 10-foot pole. Would you like to give me a Disney project? Oh, we're interested. But they said, well, we only do this kind of house, and there's a company called David Weekly Homes, and they make gazillions of dollars doing the same house everywhere. And we said, no, come to Charleston, we'll take you around. And we also went to Beaufort and took them around. And he said, this is what we want. And he said, well, nobody wants this anymore. I said, well, what are all these people living here for if they don't like it? And we had a long and painful dialogue over practically a year's time. But these big companies did not go under and built Celebration. And Celebration is a tribute to what we learned here in Charleston.
Now, I think one of the lessons of Charleston is that the single-family detached house is a component of our country's urbanism that can be deployed in a way that is in fact urban. It's not rural in its nature, it's not suburban in its nature. And I'm curious to know how your firm has thought about urban building typologies over the years.
Well, one of our continuing areas of interest and specialization, if you will, has been the large-scale apartment house. The one up on Main Street is big, but I'm talking about much bigger ones. And the typology of the apartment house, which I've done some research, I like to research things historically, and my partners do. We look at how things were done that we admire, and so there was a tradition of apartment houses around courtyards in New York, and in particular, and in other cities in Europe. And the zoning doesn't support that. The zoning in New York City was rewritten in 1960 and 61 to favor towers on plazas. But it makes it very difficult to do street-facing architecture. Now, over the 40 years, or 50 years since then, the zoning has been eaten away like a mouse to a cheese, and it's getting back to where it was in 1960. It's a very interesting story in and of itself. Anyhow, we've done apartments, and I'm not responsible for every needle building that is being lambasted along the south end of Central Park that is being built now. The press is going after the B.A.Rs one after another, but I am responsible for designing apartment buildings that evoke the great buildings of the 10s and 20s of the last century and carry that language forward and meet new accommodations today. The point is, I'm rattling on too long, but the point is, we want to build modern buildings that is to meet modern life, but they don't have to look like a toaster or a mixing machine. They can look like traditional buildings and still function in the new century, in this century, and function for the future.
Now, I'd like to maybe, you aren't rattling on too long. I think this topic is really central to our city and the debate that's going on now. Maybe we can drill down a little bit deeper into that. Charleston's city motto, translated to English, I won't attempt the Latin, is that she protects her buildings, customs, and laws. It's a fundamentally conservative city motto. It's about defensiveness, protection. And following on those observations about those building types, how, in your mind, does an historic city like Charleston, a place that needs to protect its buildings, protect its tradition, reconcile modern building typologies with its historic fabric?
Oh, this is like a horrible meeting of the B.A.R. I always invariably this meeting. Well, I mean, we want to have new ideas all the time. Everybody wants to be involved with new ideas. But new ideas have to be subtle and not at the expense of existing traditions and existing ideas. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the profession feel that in order to make a statement, they have to design something that will knock your socks off, look like you've never seen it before, and so forth. Well, I'm a good enough historian that I can tell you what the sources of every one of those quote unquote new ideas is, even if the designers of the buildings won't admit to it. But it's sensitive. It's very difficult. I appreciate that. But I think you can make buildings that are not classical or are necessarily even vernacular, but speak in a sensitive way to the scale, character, materiality of these buildings. And it's a question of where you do that in the city fabric. There are places that are more congenial to a little daring and places that are not. But Charleston's great strength is that it is a city of classical, vernacular and high classical buildings. And when you have strength, go with it. Don't try to make it something else. If you want to have modernist buildings, go build them in Atlanta. I see what I'm going to say.
Well, to follow on that, Charleston has famously been at the center of an ongoing debate about architectural traditionalism versus architectural modernism. And unlike other places, this might be good or bad, it could be like a bad meeting of the B.A.R. It doesn't just happen in academia or among debates between architects, but it really happens in the public. At B.A.R. meetings, yes, but even in the newspaper, even on the street, architecture is discussed here. It's important to people here. And not just architecture generally, but style. Now, so far, when RAMSA has built here in Charleston, it seems that you have preferred an architectural style that favors traditional languages. And I'm curious to know if you feel that is absolutely the right approach for our city. Is this a city of traditional architecture in your mind, stylistically?
Well, I have to say yes, because we wouldn't have done the projects that we are proposing if we didn't believe that that was the right thing for Charleston. When you come off the freeway coming in from the airport, which is the way a great many people drive here, or just on the freeway at all, I mean, you want to feel Charleston, not like you're feeling it not in Atlanta or some other place. So I think the traditional languages of classicism and vernacular interpretation are the right things for this city. And I have no problem with it. And it's nice that a lot of people here also share that conviction. And there have been things developed in Charleston along the rivers that are really inappropriate. And it's partially because architects paid no attention to where they were building. And some of those things have to come down, I'm afraid to say. And of course, the B.A.R. has argued for preserving some buildings, which I sometimes wonder why, but they want to have the historical record of the evolution, the high and low points of architectural design here. And that's an interesting idea. I don't find it that interesting, frankly, but I mean, the city is not an art history lesson. It's not a museum in the sense that if you have an art museum, you want to have one impressionist painting, and then you want a cubist painting, then you want a surrealist painting, and everybody gets a chance to look at things and see different things. The city is an organism of shared values. And so certain things might be perfectly nice, but not nice in this context. And that's the debate. Nice building, Mr. Architect, couldn't you build it in Atlanta?
Now, this one.
I'm only picking on Atlanta because I've only done one project there.
We pick on Atlanta too. So this won't be all like a bad B.A.R. meeting. We will get out of the realm of architectural critique. But before we leave that area, to stay on this for just a little bit more, because I think that this narrative of traditionalism and architectural modernism is so important to this place. Just tomorrow, there will be a groundbreaking ceremony for the International African American Museum, ability designed by one of your contemporaries, Harry Cobb.
Oh, good.
And it is a radically modernist horizontal
Much
slide.
older than I am.
And the building is very much a modernist expression. It's a purely modernist expression, horizontal rather than vertical tower. And just down the street, we have the building where many of my colleagues go to work, which is the Gilliard Center, designed by David Schwartz. This is where I'm going with it. In our city, we make a distinction between civic buildings and background buildings. And it's even written into our ordinances. When we reworked our B.A.R. codes a few years ago, we specifically said that civic buildings are different. Civic buildings in the new urbanist convention should be left alone and be expressions of the client and the architect wishes. And so far in Charleston, RAMSA has worked on non-civic buildings, on offices and residences. And you've made a case for those kinds of buildings being real architecture. But I'm curious to know if you agree with that approach, if you think that our civic buildings should remain uncoded and should continue to be free expressions, or if you think that the civic part of our city should be more in line with the rest of the fabric of the place.
Well, I don't disagree with that as a broad philosophical idea, and I know Andres Tuani has argued that civic buildings should be left alone. But it still doesn't mean that it's a license, as in James Bond, it's not a license to kill. I don't know what Harry Potter's designed for the African American Museum, and it's very difficult. I was working on that particular commission to find an architectural expression at a civic scale, since African Americans were denied for so very long the participation in the civic life of cities north and south. But I do think that, for example, in the case of courthouses in the United States government, for a while, in the early part of this century, it was like a free-for-all. Every architect designing a courthouse according to his or her personal style. Now, courthouses in this country have traditionally been, since the 18th century, in the classical manner. And they're organized in certain ways that encourage people to believe in the dignity of the law and its continuities. I won't get into the present political situation in Washington, I'll spare you that. But, and we have been brought in now to design a couple of courthouses. We're doing one for the Supreme Court of the state of Atlanta, so it's right in the Civic Center. It's the second building in Atlanta, and it's a classical building. And we're adding on to the building the courthouse, which was had multiple uses in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're doing classical buildings because that is what says U.S. justice is dispensed here. So I think that those buildings stand out. You would never have any trouble identifying a courthouse in any town. And I've got in lots of southern towns because southern courthouses are particularly interesting. They're always the most important building in town, often, but they stand out. But it doesn't mean that by standing out they have to be completely idiosyncratic. They shouldn't be. Have I answered your question?
Yes.
Okay. Gary will jump in and tell me if I'm in trouble. So I'm always afraid I'm going to say something horrible and the B.A.R. will attack.
I can feel him looking our way. So courthouses do figure very prominently into the southern typology of urbanism and architecture. Maybe it's because the South tends to be especially litigious. And you know, on that note, I'd like to maybe shift gears and talk a little bit about the B.A.R. topic that you just referenced and the Board of Architecture Review. You worked all over the world, and you've certainly, you and your firm have been reviewed by many different bodies of many different kinds. And I'm curious to know, in your opinion, off the record, if the work of RAMSA has been improved by architectural review boards.
Architectural review board. Let me say, some cities, say in New York, we don't have an architectural review board. It's free for all. The big political issue about architecture for a long time, quite rightly, and I've been involved in, is preservation. People get exercise ever since Pennsylvania Station was torn down and a horrible development took its place. People get politically agitated about preservation. But nobody much cares about whether one style of building is built next to another style of building or whatever. But the preservation of neighborhoods, the preservation of individual landmarks. So our most intense experience of public bodies has actually been Charleston. It really is a very tough in a good way, tough situation. You're put through your paces, and that's very good. We're working on a project now beginning to be built in London, and they have an incredible, right in the center of the city of Westminster, incredibly complicated process, but it's so opaque. One doesn't even know what's going on, and it boils down to the taste of a counselor who said he didn't like Ionic, he liked Doric. That's not really a conversation, is that it? I mean, it's like saying you want a blue suit or a gray suit. It's crazy. So I think Charleston is much better than that. But we have been lucky. I probably have forgotten. Oh, in Boston, there's a hugely complicated review process, but it also changes depending on who the mayor is in Boston. Some mayors, like in New York, just don't give a damn. They just want to build or see that things get built. Others become passionately involved. Mayor Menino put us through 7 different tops for a building called Clarendon, an apartment building right diagonally opposite Harry Cobb's last skyscraper for John Hancock. And he wasn't interested in anything else about the building but what the top would look like. So we had to do that. I think each city has its own culture in that sense. But the review process is here to stay. The federal government has a complicated review process in the forms of the General Services Administration, and they were the ones who had brought in some hotshot administrators. I don't know who the president was. It was the guy before Bush. What was his name? Clinton. And they tried to change the aesthetic of courthouses and government buildings. And they did change it. And I think 25 or 50 years from now, people are going to say, what did they have in mind with building all these strange buildings across the country? But maybe some people in the audience don't agree with me. That would not be unusual.
So you were mentioning building in Boston, and obviously your new work in New York City is on an incredible scale. Cities and buildings that are underwritten by market forces get built when cities are booming. That's when apartments are built, that's when offices are built, when cities are booming. So in your experience, how does a fast-growing city ensure architectural quality?
Well, the mechanisms have to be in place independent of the economics of the place. I mean, the B.A.R. has been in place in Charleston, I don't know how long, but since the 1920s, I think. 1931. So it was started right at the bottom of the Depression. So it goes through the cycles of the economy. Landmarks preservation in New York started in 1965, and initially it didn't have much teeth in it in the legislation, but it continued to grow, and the developers said it will ruin the city. Nothing will happen. The Upper East Side is finished. We closed the door on development. Well, that is not true at all. So I think that you have to have the mechanisms in place, and you have to have tough administrators who see things through, but also work in the realities of the marketplace. I mean, if no developers want to build buildings, it doesn't make any difference if you have rules. You have nothing to exercise the rules against, to run against. So I'm not sure I understand your question quite, but right now, yes, Charleston is booming, but who knows, the economy may falter. I mean, Boeing is in disastrous shape, we know that. They bungled that big time. And it's not that division that's here in Charleston, but it can't but affect the company, so the economy may cool there. Other things may come in and take its place. I mean, when I first came to Charleston, there was no Boeing, there was no aircraft industry. There was nothing out there. The airport, I don't know if anybody remember the airport. It made third world travel up to market.
We do remember the airport, by the way. So let's get away from the issue of architectural regulation and the B.A.R. have been an educator for so much of your career, and during your time at Yale, you famously brought in an incredibly diverse group of voices. You worked with people from Creer, Porphyrios, but you also brought in Geary. It was incredibly diverse. And I'm curious to know a little bit about your current observations on architectural education in America. And then after that, I want to zero in on Charleston a little bit. But tell us, after all of your time in academia, how's architectural education doing right now?
Well, you know, from the perch of Yale, which is one of the top architecture schools, I can say that safely and honestly, and which has always been committed to architecture as an art, because actually the architecture school at Yale grew out of the School of the Fine Arts, which is the oldest school of the fine arts in any university in America. So that's the perspective of the place. I studied under Paul Rudolph, and he believed that everybody should have a voice in the architectural studios, and he brought in a diverse range of people to teach, and he believed that students don't know what they're doing, but that's why they're students. They should know that there's a wealth of design or style opportunities and other opportunities. They should be exposed to ideas, and then they can take them and digest them and go forward. There are other schools, like the one that Mies van der Rohe ran at IIT. It was my way or the highway, which was the way Mies taught it, and it did not foster a rich culture. So I think that the problem in schools is that styles are taught in a narrow way, and they're not, and traditional styles are not taught by and large. There are a few programs, Notre Dame and Yale, we have as part of the salad, the tossed salad studios that are devoted to traditional architecture, have people come in to teach in those studios. But what is more basic than that is the art of drawing. The computer has turned architects into typists. All sitting there doing this. And we have millions of dollars worth of computers in our office, but we emphasize drawing. And I was happy to see, walking into this building a half hour or so before the event started, there were a bunch of students sitting on the floor drawing the building. Wish they had a better-looking building to draw, but they weren't drawing the building by hand. That's the way you see. Very few architecture schools today are teaching drawing. And this is all I know, of course, that's what I know best. We require hand drawing. And we send students to Rome, and they go to Rome not to sit in the studio and do a project they could just as well have done back in New Haven or wherever, but to walk around for 5 weeks with readers and draw the buildings and look at the details, and it becomes part of their DNA. They may not do classical architecture, but they understand it visually. So those things have fallen by the wayside in our architecture in the 20th century. Architects up until the early part of the 20th century, let's say the First World War, all studied by drawing from life, by copying buildings. Well, the word copying has become a very bad word in architectural education, but we all learn by copying. We learn anything. If you're going to be a pianist, how do you learn to play the piano? Well, you get those 5-finger exercises and you copy, and remember, the pianist teacher used to slam his fingers on mine, and he discouraged me sufficiently from being a pianist that way, but that's how you learn, copying. So that's coming out of architectural education. And I've tried to hold the line, but one man or one school cannot do it for the whole country. Does that answer your question?
It does answer the question. And in doing research for this conversation, I did stumble upon your acceptance speech for the Treehouse Prize in 2011. And one of the things that I hope I got the quote right that you said was that for me, the classical tradition is the gateway to the house of architecture. And for you, does that speak to that tradition of hand drawing? And does it make a classically trained architect or artist more capable of addressing all styles of buildings or art?
Well, it gives a classically trained or classically aware, I'd rather use that term, architect is able to tackle design problems from multiple points of view. The problem with those students who today, almost all of them, who only study architecture through the digital, is that they are actually not in control of the sources of the forms. The forms are algorithms that some German computer scientist cooked up and wrote a program for, or something like that. I think to look at classical architecture, to consider the proportional systems, a proportional system of the golden section, which is at the heart of classical composition, is perfect. And of course, Mies van der Rohe thought he was making a classical architecture for the world of steel and iron and glass. He may or may not have done that, but he was a master of classical proportions. The firms that have emulated him, when I was in architecture school, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill was the famous corporate firm, and we called them Three Blind Mies. It looked like Mies, but it wasn't right. So it's a very complicated question, but I think to study by looking at buildings, by copying them, the Beaux-Arts method, you would design as a beginning student copy a building or a detail from a great building of the past to get it into your hand, to get it into your eye and into your brain. And so I don't think that's a bad system. Painters, there are two kinds of painters in art schools these days. There are those who just want to, again, knock your eyes out and get a New York gallery as fast as possible. And there are those who look very carefully at things and do their work as a student out of the traditions that they admire of artists from the past. And there's a wonderful show at Yale Art Gallery. You all ought to go to Yale and see it, by a man named William Bailey, who is 90 years old and who used to be the chairman of the art school, dean of the art school at Yale, who just draws beautiful, and look him up, please, his work on vases and still lifes in a way that's breathtaking, and he just has a limited subject, and he does it over and over and over again, and the paintings are astonishing. So that there's room for that kind of deep exploration in architecture that we see too little of. But people like Greer, who's so self-taught, Jack Robertson, who was just a couple of years older than I was at Yale, self-taught through drawing and through looking, and also questioning the rather spurious arguments that are frequently made by architects and architectural historians. They're very dangerous architectural historians in defense of certain aesthetics, as though they were all important. I'm really rattling on, but the idea that the history of architecture is a straight line, or that the history of art is a straight line, has emerged in the 19th century and continued well into the late 20th century. The newly reopened Museum of Modern Art for the first time has challenged that within the world of modern art, that everything doesn't beget everything doesn't exist in a strict chronological form. Now, I haven't seen the rehab of the museum, but it's been extensively discussed in all the journals, newspapers that I'm aware of, and I think it shows that the master narrative idea is going away, fortunately, to a more flexible view. That exists, the collapse of the master narrative, that this is what you must do because you come at this point, and this one went before you, and he who came before that is going away too. There is no master narrative. you can be free to look and make as you think is appropriate. Who determines what is appropriate is you and the world of architecture, but the public. The public likes certain things, and it should be heard.
At this moment in time, I know you just arrived back in Charleston today, but with the folks in the room, there are many architects and many practitioners here and students as well. I'm curious to know, what is your advice to the city of Charleston today?
Oh, come on, I can't do that. Carry on. I think we've got a good thing going. It's in terms of an engaged public, an engaged city hall in a good way, and wonderful institutions. This very college has very good programs, and Ralph Muldrow is in the room, and other people probably teaching programs in reservation and design, planning, and how they all interlock. So you have a good thing going. You just have to be careful not to let the Bauhaus boys intimidate you. If you want to build in the Bauhaus, go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Harvard. You see, we have Yale, which isn't the Bauhaus, and Harvard is the Bauhaus.
Bob, thank you very much.